I never planned to reveal it this way. Not in the quiet tension of a sterile hospital room. Not in front of my mother clutching my sister's hand with her usual tight-lipped concern or my father pacing near the window like there was a more important meeting he was late for. Not even in front of Emily, whose expression hovered somewhere between fear and self-importance as she lay in the hospital bed awaiting answers. But life as always has a way of choosing the moment for you. "Hello, Chief of Surgery," the nurse said, standing respectfully just a few feet away, her voice calm but clear. My family froze. No one said a word. Even Emily, usually quick to fill any silence, was stunned into stillness. My mother blinked as if unsure she had heard correctly. My father turned slowly toward me, disbelief furrowing his brow. In that split second, everything I had spent a lifetime building stood between us, undeniable and visible for the first time. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and I am the chief of surgery at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. It still feels strange to say that out loud. Not because I'm not proud, but because I've spent most of my life downplaying my achievements, especially around the people who should have cared the most. For most of my childhood, I was invisible. My younger sister Elise was the golden child. Bright, charming, photogenic in every school photo, and perfectly tailored to the image my parents wanted to present to the world. I was the quiet one, observant, serious, always reading or building or solving something, but rarely noticed. If Elise got a B in school, it was cause for celebration. She worked so hard my mother would be making reservations for dinner and inviting family over to praise her progress. When I got straight A's, my father would nod distractedly behind his newspaper. "Good job, Natalie," he'd say without looking up. No dinner, no celebration, no photos on the fridge. I learned early not to expect much. Birthdays were the clearest indicator of where I stood. Elise had ponies, magicians, backyard carnivals. I had a store-bought cake often, the wrong flavor, and a handful of polite "oh right, it's yours too" from relatives still talking about Elise's party the month before. I wasn't angry. At least, not back then. I just assumed that maybe this was how the world worked. Some people were born to shine. Others, like me, were meant to orbit quietly around them. And so I did what I always did. I disappeared into the background and went to work. While Elise danced and posed for cameras, I read about the human heart, fascinated by how something so small could do so much. I dissected frogs in our garage and watched medical documentaries after everyone went to bed. I became my own tutor, my own cheerleader, my own mirror. No one clapped, but I kept going. By the time I reached adulthood, I had learned to stop offering pieces of myself for validation I knew would never come. Every milestone, college admissions, scholarships, residencies, was met with lukewarm support at best. "Just don't burn yourself out," my mother would say over the phone. "Is it really worth all that effort?" my father would ask. Still, I pushed forward, driven not by revenge but by something deeper, the promise I made to myself the night before I left for college, sitting alone in our backyard under a sky too big to belong to people who only saw small things. One day I told myself, they'll see who I am. Not because I tell them, but because they won't be able to look away. That day had finally come. And it came without warning. The moment the nurse addressed me as chief of surgery, everything in the room shifted. Years of assumptions, dismissals, and underestimation collapsed in the space between us. They had brought Elise to my hospital. They had asked to speak to the best, and they had no idea she was already in the room. "Chief of..." My mother's voice trailed off almost in protest. The nurse looked confused. "Dr. Natalie Brooks," she clarified. "She's been leading the surgical department for the past 3 months." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Because sometimes success speaks louder than a lifetime of silence. And sometimes when the world finally sees you, it has no choice but to bow. The first time I fell in love with medicine, I was 7 years old, sitting on a hard vinyl chair in the waiting room of St. Augustine Medical Center. My grandfather had been rushed in for emergency heart surgery. The adults in my family whispered in hushed tones, pacing the floor, wringing their hands while I sat quietly with a book about the human body resting on my lap. It was one of those brightly colored, oversized books with cartoon illustrations of lungs and bones and brain cells. I didn't fully understand the words yet, but I studied the pictures like they held some kind of secret power. When the surgeon finally walked out tall, composed, wearing a white coat that billowed slightly as he moved, everyone in the room froze. He looked like someone who had just returned from battle. Calm. Decisive. Unshaken. And I was mesmerized. He spoke to my family with confidence, explaining that the surgery had gone well, that my grandfather was stable and in recovery. My mother cried with relief. My father shook his hand solemnly. And I sat there, not moving, not blinking, trying to memorize the moment. That man had just saved someone I loved. With his hands, with his mind, he didn't wear a cape or fly through the sky. He wore gloves and scrubs, and to me he was a superhero. On the way home, as we drove in silence, through the glowing streetlights, I looked up from the back seat and declared, I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up. There was a brief pause. My father glanced at me through the rearview mirror, then gave a small chuckle like I had said something adorably naive. That's a nice dream, Nat, he said. But being a doctor takes a very special kind of person. It's hard. Not everyone's cut out for it. Before I could respond, Elise, who was only 5 at the time, piped up beside me, I want to be a doctor too. My mother turned around from the passenger seat beaming. Oh, honey, I can see that. You've got the brains for it, sweetheart. She reached back and patted Elise's knee gently. That was it. My first dream met with doubt, deflection, and dismissal, all in the span of one car ride. No one asked me why I wanted to become a doctor. No one looked at me and said, you can do it. Instead, I got a soft laugh and a warning about how difficult the path would be. But Elise, she got validation. Encouragement. A mother's pride wrapped in a single touch. I didn't understand favoritism at 7 years old, but I felt it. I felt it like cold water in my shoes, unseen by others, but soaking through every step I took. After that night, I started watching how my parents responded to the two of us. Elise was sparkly and theatrical. She sang loudly, performed impromptu puppet shows, and demanded attention in the way only charismatic children can. My parents adored it. They called her our little star. I was quieter. I preferred puzzles to parties, books to attention. And in our family, quiet wasn't seen as thoughtful, it was seen as lacking. The differences in how we were treated weren't always obvious, but they were constant. When Elise talked about wanting to be a vet or an astronaut or a movie star, my parents encouraged her with wide eyes and wide arms. When I said I still wanted to be a doctor, they'd offer polite nods followed by stories of people who'd tried and failed. It wasn't just what they said, it was what they didn't say. No, I believe in you. No, you can do hard things. No, we'll support you no matter what. And so my dream became something I held close like a spark. I was afraid someone might blow out if I let it show too much. But I never forgot that surgeon's face in the waiting room. I never forgot how he made my family feel. And I never forgot how I wanted to be someone who could walk into chaos and bring calm, someone who could hold a beating heart in her hands and know what to do. Even at 7 years old, I didn't just want to be impressive. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to matter. The irony, of course, is that I would spend the next 2 decades building myself into exactly that kind of person, and yet my family would still only ever see me as the quiet one. They thought their comments were harmless. Maybe they even believed they were protecting me from disappointment. But those early doubts weren't harmless. They were seeds. And what they didn't know, what they still don't understand, is that those seeds didn't die. They rooted. They grew. They hardened into steel beneath my skin. And they fueled me. Every time someone looked past me, I trained harder. Every time they celebrated Elise's flair over my focus, I studied longer. Every time they gently steered me towards something more realistic, I turned back toward my purpose with even greater conviction. I didn't become a surgeon in spite of those small wounds. I became one because of them. Because even a child who feels invisible can still grow up to hold power in her hands. And sometimes the fire that fuels us starts with the softest, smallest spark. A book in a waiting room. A surgeon's calm voice. A girl no one believed in yet couldn't stop dreaming. By the time I hit middle school, I had developed a quiet obsession with perfection. Perfect attendance, perfect homework, Perfect test scores. If I couldn't win their affection with charm or sparkle like Elise, I thought maybe I could earn it with achievement. I brought home straight A's on my first report card of 7th grade. Every subject, math, science, literature, even gym, lined up in a perfect row of letters I thought might finally unlock something in them. A smile. A dinner out. A sliver of recognition. Instead, my father barely looked up from the evening news. "That's nice, Natalie," he said, taking a sip from his glass. He didn't ask how I did it. He didn't ask how it felt. He just turned back to the screen where some political debate was heating up over the economy. Across the room, my mother was flipping through catalogs for party decorations. It was for Elise. She had just managed to raise her C average in science to a B, and my parents had decided it was cause for celebration. A motivation party, they called it. There would be decorations, cupcakes from the expensive bakery downtown, and a magician hired for the afternoon. I remember watching them plan it like it was a wedding. "She's worked so hard," my mother said to a friend on the phone. "She's turning a corner, really showing initiative." Then, after a pause, "She has that natural leadership quality, always has." That line stayed with me. Not because I didn't believe Elise had charm, she did, but because it was clear to me for the first time that my quiet diligence wasn't seen as a sign of leadership or intelligence or value. It was just expected. Background noise. I used to think maybe if I made enough noise they'd notice. So I joined the science fair, won first place with a project on the circulatory system, and qualified for regionals. At dinner I brought it up between bites of meatloaf. My mother smiled vaguely. "That's great, honey." Then she turned to Elise. "Did you tell your choir teacher you're interested in a solo yet?" It was always like that. Every time I stepped forward, the spotlight shifted sideways. Eventually I stopped stepping forward. Not because I stopped trying, but because I stopped trying for them. I stopped leaving my report cards on the kitchen counter. I stopped waiting for praise. I stopped expecting that anyone in my house would see me as anything other than dependable, quiet Natalie, the one who could handle herself. Instead, I built my world somewhere else. In the early mornings before school, I'd sit cross-legged on my bedroom floor reading anatomy books I'd checked out from the local library. In the evenings, while Elise rehearsed her lines for the school play downstairs, I watched surgical videos on mute, studying how hands moved across organs with purpose and precision. At school, I found teachers who noticed when I went above and beyond. In science club, I found classmates who admired my ideas. In books, I found women who looked nothing like me but carried the kind of strength I wanted to grow into. I became an expert at disappearing in plain sight. Because when your light goes unnoticed for too long, you stop trying to shine for others, and instead you start building your own fire where no one can reach it. It wasn't all pain. There were small moments of sweetness. Like the day Miss Jensen, my 8th grade English teacher, pulled me aside after class and said, "You have a voice worth listening to, Natalie. Don't ever let the quiet take that from you." Or when I won a district-wide math competition, and one of the judges, a retired doctor, shook my hand and said, "You'd make a hell of a surgeon someday." I held onto those words like lifelines. Because when love doesn't come from home, you start learning to survive off of scraps from strangers. My parents weren't cruel. That's important to say. They weren't abusive. They fed me, housed me, clothed me. But they never saw me. And that kind of invisibility carves itself into your bones. It teaches you how to smile when your heart aches, how to applaud for others while you ache to be clapped for, how to make room for people who never once thought to make room for you. So I made room for myself. I stopped trying to be noticed. I started trying to become undeniable. Looking back, I think Elise noticed the difference before anyone else. She'd come into my room sometimes and see me diagramming body systems or scribbling notes from a medical textbook 2 grade levels above me. "What are you doing that for?" she'd ask. And I'd shrug. "Just something I'm interested in." She never teased me for it. Not once. But she also didn't seem to understand the hunger behind it, the way I clung to medicine not just as a career dream, but as proof that I mattered. It was around this time that my relationship with my family quietly shifted. No big arguments, no drama, just distance. Not in miles, but in meaning. I still showed up. Still did the chores. Still smiled in family photos. But inside, I was learning to stop looking outward for affirmation and start looking inward for fuel. And what I found, there was a girl who didn't need applause. She just needed space. And a fire no one else could see yet. It was Mr. Carr who changed everything. He was my high school biology teacher, a tall man with gentle hands and eyes that missed nothing. While other teachers moved through lessons like checking boxes, Mr. Carr treated biology like it was sacred. Like we weren't just memorizing facts, but learning the language of life itself. I sat in the front row naturally. Took notes like they were gold. Answered questions even when no one else raised a hand. I didn't care if I sounded like a know-it-all. In his class, curiosity felt like courage. One afternoon I stayed after the bell to finish reviewing a slide under the microscope. It was a cross-section of cardiac tissue, and I was tracing the branching fibers with the tip of my pencil on the page beside me. I didn't hear Mr. Carr walk up. "You've got a good eye," he said quietly. "And better technique than some of my seniors." I blinked up at him surprised. I wasn't used to being noticed in that way. "I've seen how you work," he continued. "You're not just smart, you're precise, focused. That's rare." I felt something unlock inside me. A breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. No one had ever spoken to me like that. Not at home, not at church, not at family dinners where Elise's latest school project was passed around like a work of art while mine stayed in my backpack. "Mr. Carr kept talking, his tone casual but firm. "Have you ever considered medicine?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He smiled. "Then we're going to get you ready." From that day on, he became my first real mentor. He slipped me articles from medical journals, challenged me with extra reading, and introduced me to a local mentorship program for girls in STEM. He even brought in a guest speaker, an alumna who was now a surgical resident, and made sure I had a front row seat. "You don't just belong in science," he told me once. "You belong at the table where discoveries are made." He didn't say it like a motivational poster. He said it like a fact. Like gravity. Undeniable. When college application season rolled around, I hesitated before listing Princeton as one of my targets. It felt too big. Too elite. Too far from what my family thought I could handle. But Mr. Carr didn't hesitate. "You're going to apply," he said. "And I'm going to write you the strongest recommendation letter they've ever read." And he did. A month later, I got the email. "Congratulations. We're pleased to offer you admission to Princeton University's pre-med program with a merit scholarship." I stared at the screen, hands trembling. Then I called out from my bedroom, "Mom, Dad." They were sitting in the living room. The television was on muted during a commercial. "I got into Princeton," I said, trying to sound calm. "With a scholarship." There was a pause. My father looked at me over his reading glasses. "Princeton," he repeated. "That's expensive." "I got a scholarship," I reminded him. "Well, that helps," my mother said, her tone already hedging. "But it's still a long way from home. And medicine isn't exactly an easy path." I stood there waiting for something else. A hug, a smile. "We're proud of you." But nothing came. Finally, my dad said, "Just don't go into debt for something that might not work out." Later that night, I sat on the floor of my room, laptop still glowing beside me, and tried to let the acceptance feel real. I had done something big. Something they didn't think I could do. But their silence wrapped around me like fog. The next day, I told Mr. Carr. He smiled so wide I thought his face might split. "I knew you'd get in," he said. "They'd be fools not to take you." He handed me a small envelope neatly sealed. "Just a little something I wrote for your scholarship file," he said. I opened it that night. It was a personal note, not required, just something he wanted to say. "Natalie, you are one of the most capable, quietly brilliant students I've had in 20 years of teaching. Not because you chase praise, but because you chase purpose. Medicine needs more minds like yours. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Mr. Carr, I cried reading it. Because it was the first time I felt seen. That letter lived in the back of my wallet for years. I kept it through undergrad, through medical school interviews, through every long night of studying, and every moment I doubted myself. Because when no one in your family tells you you're enough, you learn to hold tight to the voices that do. Brick by brick, I was building something. A life, a path, a self. Not with praise or permission, but with quiet resolve and the steady guidance of someone who believed in me, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Mr. Carr wasn't related to me, but he saw me more clearly than anyone with my blood ever did. And in the end, that was enough to get me started. It happened over dinner. Elise twirled a forkful of pasta and said it so casually you'd think she was announcing a new hobby. I've been thinking about going into medicine too. My mother gasped, hands flying to her chest like she'd just heard angels sing. Really, Elise, that would be incredible, my father beamed. Just like your sister. That's the Brooks determination. I waited for someone to glance my way. To acknowledge that I had in fact already been accepted into Princeton's pre-med program. That I was currently carrying a full course load while working part-time in a neuroscience lab. But no one looked at me. The spotlight had shifted and this time it wasn't moving back. Within days, it was all anyone in the family could talk about. Elise wants to be a doctor. Elise is exploring options. Elise is applying to Rutgers and already thinking about specialties. They spoke about her like she'd already achieved what I was still grinding for. At a family gathering, my Uncle Jared clapped me on the shoulder. Looks like your little sister's following in your footsteps, he said with a chuckle. Maybe you two can open a practice together one day. Before I could respond, my mother cut in laughing lightly. Oh, Natalie's still figuring things out. Elise has always known exactly what she wanted. I felt something twist inside me. Not quite anger, more like disbelief. I had known what I wanted since I was 7. I had fought tooth and nail for every inch of progress. I had studied, sacrificed, and suffered in silence. But Elise had merely decided, and suddenly the world bowed at her feet. In group chats with extended family, everyone congratulated Elise on her ambition. Cousins messaged me with, "So proud of Elise. Is medicine something you're still considering too?" It was like I'd been erased. Not just overlooked, but replaced. I should have spoken up, should have claimed my place. But instead, I went quiet again. It was easier, safer. And honestly, I was exhausted. I was tired of correcting people's assumptions. Tired of trying to prove that I belonged at the table they kept pulling away from me. Tired of pretending that the constant comparisons didn't sting. The next semester, I threw myself into my coursework harder than ever. While Elise posted photos of her new white coat from a community college orientation, I was running cardiac simulations in the university lab. While my parents cooed over her natural bedside manner, I was shadowing trauma surgeons during their 3 a.m. rounds. And when Elise announced her acceptance into Rutgers with a modest scholarship, my parents threw her a party. There were balloons shaped like stethoscopes. A cake that said, "Future Dr. Elise." Matching t-shirts, Instagram posts. I attended the party, of course. Smiled in the photos. Clapped during the toast. But something inside me dimmed. During that celebration, one of our family friends pulled me aside. "She's such a star," she said, motioning toward Elise. "It's amazing how easily some people fall into their purpose." She tilted her head. "And you, Natalie. Are you still thinking about medicine too?" As if I were the one copying. As if Elise had planted the flag. I smiled tightly. "Yes, I'm still in the program. Actually, I'm working in a clinical lab this summer." "Oh, that's nice," she said vaguely, already turning back to the crowd. It wasn't just that Elise was favored, it was that she fit their narrative better. She was charming, effortless, photogenic. They could imagine her in glossy brochures, on hospital websites, speaking at fundraisers. Me, I was quiet, serious, relentless. I didn't entertain. I didn't sparkle, I just worked. And in a world obsessed with optics, hard work without a halo often goes unseen. There's something uniquely painful about being forgotten in the very story you started writing. But that pain, it became fuel. I stopped showing up for every family dinner. Stopped correcting people when they confused my program with Elise's. Let them believe what they wanted. While they were celebrating her beginnings, I was deep in the middle of building something they'd never understand. And one day I told myself they'd see it. Not because I shouted, but because it would be too big to ignore. The last time I told them anything, I was trying to make them proud. I had just received a research grant, my first real one, for a summer project under a rising star cardiothoracic surgeon at Columbia. It was competitive, prestigious, the kind of opportunity that most pre-med students dream about. I called home, excitement buzzing under my skin like static. I wanted to share it. To hear something, anything that sounded like pride. My mother answered. "That's nice, sweetheart," she said after I finished explaining, distracted. "Did I tell you Elise is volunteering at a local clinic? The patients just love her. She has such a warm presence." I paused. "That's great," I said. "Maybe you could learn from that," she added. "You've always been more cerebral. You could work on your people skills." That night, I quietly archived the email with the award letter and said nothing more about it. A few months later, I found out that Elise had failed 2 core classes in her first year of med school. She'd been placed on academic probation, and by the end of the year, she officially withdrew from the program. I didn't hear it from her. I didn't hear it from my parents either. I heard it through a classmate who knew someone in her cohort. When I asked my mom about it, she sighed dramatically. She decided medicine wasn't the right fit. "It's not for everyone, you know. She's being smart, choosing a more balanced lifestyle. You could take a note from her, Natalie. You work so hard all the time." I stared at my phone, silent. There was no mention of how I had stuck with it. No thank you for not giving up, no we're proud of you for being the one who made it through. Just another reminder Elise's decisions were always framed as wisdom. Mine were framed as obsession. That was the moment I decided I would stop telling them anything at all. No more updates, no more news. No more handing over pieces of my life just to watch them be discarded or repackaged in someone else's story. I built a wall of silence, not out of spite but out of survival. I knew I was on the right path. I had people who believed in me. People like Dr. Catherine Lin, my mentor, my lifeline. Dr. Lin was everything I aspired to be: brilliant, composed, endlessly curious. A nationally respected neurosurgeon who had written groundbreaking papers in her field. She chose me to assist on a publication after I submitted a paper in one of her research seminars. "You have the mind of a surgeon," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "Methodical. Disciplined. But what I love most is that you don't perform for praise. You work because you believe in the work." That line lodged itself deep in my heart. Finally, someone saw me not just for what I achieved but for why I did it. She took me under her wing. Let me shadow her in the OR. Gave me feedback that cut deep but made me better. And when it came time to apply for medical school, she wrote me a letter of recommendation that made me cry. "You're not just going to be a doctor," she said. "You're going to change this field." Meanwhile, at home, Elise was launching a wellness blog. My parents were ecstatic. "She already has 500 followers," my mother gushed on a family call. "She's so good with people. She's really finding her voice." They never asked how my med school applications were going. Never asked about Dr. Lin. Never asked if I needed anything. So I gave them what they expected: surface-level updates. School's going fine. Busy with labs. Nothing much going on. Each sentence chipped away at the part of me that had once wanted to share everything. But it also sharpened something else. Resolve, focus, freedom. By the time I got into Columbia Medical School, I told no one. Not my parents. Not Elise. Not the extended family that still thought I was considering medicine. Instead, I called Dr. Lin and thanked her for everything. She sent me a card that read, "This is just the beginning. Keep building quietly. The world will catch up later." I taped that card to the inside of my desk drawer. Because by then I had learned the truth. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's self-respect. It's choosing not to cast your pearls in places where they'll be trampled. It's knowing that your worth isn't up for discussion. It's building something real brick by brick without waiting for applause that will never come. They used to say I was too intense. Too serious. Too focused. Maybe I was. But it's that very intensity that got me through the long nights of anatomy lab, the relentless pressure of rotations, the crushing expectations of med school. It's what carried me when no one was cheering. What fueled me when no one was watching. What whispered, "Keep going. You don't need them to see you yet." And I didn't. Because I had already seen myself. And that was enough to keep building. The email came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was between surgical cases still scrubbing out when I saw the subject line on my phone screen. Final decision, chief of surgery appointment. My breath caught. I clicked it open with wet fingers and read the first line 3 times just to believe it. We are honored to offer you the position of chief of surgery at Massachusetts General Hospital. I leaned against the locker room wall blinking. At 34, I was about to become one of the youngest people and one of the very few women ever appointed to that role in the hospital's 200-year history. A part of me wanted to cry. A part of me wanted to scream. But the biggest part of me just exhaled. Like it had been holding that breath for years. I told no one. Not at home anyway. There was no text to my mother, no call to my father, no group chat announcement or celebratory dinner. I'd learned better by then. If I told them, the responses would range from underwhelming to undermining. Wow, that's a lot of pressure. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? Don't you think it's time to slow down and think about starting a family number? I wouldn't give them the chance to deflate this. Not this time. The hospital board held a private ceremony. There were speeches. A new nameplate installed on my office door. Colleagues shaking my hand with genuine respect. Dr. Lynn flew in from New York and hugged me so tightly I thought I might actually cry. "You did it, Natalie," she whispered. "You built it." The room was filled with applause. But I didn't look around for familiar faces, because none of them were there. And for the first time, I didn't feel the absence. I didn't feel punished. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. That evening, after everyone had left and the building had settled into nighttime quiet, I walked alone to the rooftop balcony outside my new office. It was late summer in Boston. The air warm, the Charles River glistening under moonlight. I poured a glass of champagne that someone had left in a chilled bucket and stepped outside. The skyline blinked in the distance, steady, brilliant, alive. And I let myself take it in, not for anyone else, not for the photo, not for the praise. Just for me. I thought about that little girl in the waiting room with the anatomy book. The teenager buried in textbooks while her sister posed for pictures. The college student who taped letters of recommendation to her desk drawer because her parents didn't ask to see them. And I smiled. Because she had made it here, and she had done it without applause. Without shortcuts. Without shortcuts. Brick by brick. Step by step. Quietly. Steadily. Unshakably. I lifted my glass and toasted the night air. To the woman they didn't see coming, I said. I wasn't bitter. Bitterness implies longing. I wasn't longing anymore. I was arrived. I thought I'd feel alone in a moment like this. But I didn't. Because I had become my own witness. And when you've spent your whole life being unseen, learning to see yourself is the most radical form of healing. 2 weeks after I was named chief of surgery, I boarded a plane home. Not for celebration. Not for rest. For Elisa's engagement dinner. She was marrying James Archer, son of a real estate developer, good-looking, good on paper, good at parties. My parents adored him, of course. He was the final puzzle piece in Elisa's curated life. The restaurant was upscale, decorated in blush and gold with a long table set for 20. Family, friends, colleagues of my father, and at least 2 people I hadn't seen since I was 12. I arrived late. Flight delays. No one noticed. As I slipped into my seat near the end of the table, my father was already mid-toast. "Elise," he said, raising his glass, "has always had a gift for knowing what she wants. And going after it." There was a chorus of polite laughter. "She's charismatic, driven, full of light," he went on. "She's made us prouder than words can express." My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin. The guests clapped. No one looked toward me. No one asked if I'd eaten. If my flight was okay, if I was there. Dinner was a symphony of praise. Elise spoke about her wedding plans, her Pinterest board the location they were scouting in Napa. My parents chimed in about her vision and natural leadership. Even James's mother leaned across the table and said, "Your daughter has such presence. You must be so proud." Oh, my mother beamed. She's always had something special. Later, when a cousin turned to me and asked, "So what have you been up to, Natalie?" I took a breath. I was ready. I was going to say it. I was going to tell them. But my mother cut in. "Oh, she's still at the hospital in New York," she said quickly. "Still working those crazy hours." She shook her head with a mix of affection and concern. "We keep telling her there's more to life than work." My father chuckled. "Some people take longer to find their path, but better late than never, right?" A few people smiled awkwardly. I blinked. That was all I was then. The overworked older sister. Too busy to settle down, still figuring it out. Never mind the title on my office door. Never mind the department I led. Never mind the surgeries I'd pioneered or the papers I'd published. In their narrative, I was still the cautionary tale. The reminder of what happens when you work too hard and shine too little. I felt the words rise again. Actually, I was just appointed chief of surgery at Massachusetts General. But before I could speak, Elise stood and tapped her glass. "James and I have one more announcement," she said, smiling. The room quieted. "I'm pregnant." The table exploded in cheers. My mother gasped, hands flying to her mouth. "Oh my God." My father wrapped Elise in a hug so tight I thought she might disappear into it. People were crying, clapping, toasting again. I sat back in my chair, glass untouched, voice swallowed whole. Whatever words I might have spoken were gone now, buried beneath the sound of applause and the shimmer of champagne. I looked at Elise. Radiant, glowing, effortless. And for a brief moment, I wondered what it would feel like to be celebrated for simply existing. To be handed a microphone and told, "We've been waiting to hear from you." But I wasn't that person. Not in their world. In their world, I was the dependable one. The serious one. The one who would clap, smile, and make no scene. So that's exactly what I did. Later that night, as I folded my coat over my arm and prepared to leave, my mother found me in the hallway. "You should learn from Elise," she said, folding a towel that didn't need folding. "She understands what really matters in life." Then quieter. "It's not too late for you, sweetheart. You could still have all this." I looked at her, this woman who had never seen me clearly. Who had looked past every version of me that wasn't Elise-shaped. And I smiled. A small, tired smile. "I'm very happy with my life, Mom." She tilted her head. "Are you? You work all the time. You have no partner. No children. That's not much of a life." I picked up my bag. "It's my life," I said softly. "And it's a good one." I left that night with a strange calmness. Not angry. Not even sad. Just done. Because the most painful kind of invisibility isn't when strangers overlook you. It's when the people who should know you best never even tried to look. I was midway through a budget review meeting when my assistant knocked on the door, something she rarely did unless it was urgent. "Dr. Brooks," she said, eyes wide, "there's a call for you. It's your family. It's about your sister." My stomach dropped. I stepped into the hallway and picked up the phone, already bracing myself. My mother's voice cracked through the line. "It's Elise," she collapsed. "They think it's preeclampsia. She's being taken to the hospital now, to Massachusetts General." Of course she was. Out of every hospital in the city, fate or irony had delivered them to mine. "I'll meet you there," I said, simply, already moving. By the time I reached the emergency floor, Elise had been admitted and transferred to high-risk obstetrics. I reviewed her file quickly, elevated blood pressure, concerning protein levels, but the baby's heartbeat was stable. Manageable. Not immediately life-threatening. Thank God. I took a moment to straighten my blazer, removed my name badge, and stepped onto the ward, not as chief of surgery, but as a sister. I found them in the room, my father pacing by the window, my mother perched at Elise's side, and Elise herself, pale but awake, looking equal parts annoyed and frightened. When I walked in, all three glanced over. "You're finally here," my mother said. "No, thank you." No relief. Just a hint of blame. Have you talked to the doctors? No one's told us anything. We've been waiting forever. I just got here, I replied calmly, stepping toward Elise. How are you feeling? My head is killing me, Elise groaned. They said something about blood pressure, but we haven't seen the doctor yet. It's ridiculous. You're at one of the best hospitals in the country, I said. You're in good hands. My father scoffed. Still no excuse for keeping us waiting. I don't understand why it takes so long to get proper care. I bit my tongue. Because in that moment I realized they had no idea whose hands they were already in. My mother leaned over to Elise. Hopefully they'll send someone experienced. Not some intern. She needs the best. She'll get the best, I said evenly. They didn't even hear me. For the next hour I sat silently in the corner chair, listening. My mother complained about the food. My father muttered about how hospitals never respected people's time. Elise shifted restlessly and asked for ice chips twice. No one asked why I was already there. No one asked what I did these days. To them, I was still the daughter who showed up, not the woman who ran the floor. And for the first time, I found it amusing. Not painful, not frustrating, just poetic. They were critiquing my staff in my hospital, sitting on a bed I could have had moved with a single phone call. And they didn't even know it. Finally, Nurse Jackson walked in, efficient, composed, tablet in hand. She glanced toward me, then froze subtly. Recognition flickered across her face. I gave a slight shake of my head. Not yet. She turned back to the room. We're monitoring blood pressure closely. Dr. Bennett, our maternal fetal specialist, will be here shortly. My mother sighed. Finally. She's one of the best in her field, the nurse added. She better be, my father grumbled. I held my silence. Because I wasn't just in the room anymore. I was the test. The unspoken question hung in the air. What happens when the people who doubted you are forced to depend on you? The door opened again. Nurse Jackson returned, this time with a young resident and Elise's chart. She glanced at me again, and this time she didn't hold back. She stood tall, stepped forward, and said in a voice as clear as crystal, "Hello, Chief of Surgery." The room froze. My father blinked. My mother tilted her head, confused. Elise sat up a little. I didn't realize you were already with the patient, the nurse continued, her tone formal now. Dr. Bennett is on her way for consult. My mother's eyes widened. Chief of... Wait, what? The nurse looked between us. Dr. Natalie Brooks is our chief of surgery. She's been here for several months. The silence in the room was thunderous. Elise stared at me like she didn't recognize me. My father's mouth opened, then closed again. My mother simply said, "But you never said anything." I stood slowly. Would it have mattered if I had? And there it was. The moment, the shift, the reversal. The culmination of years of being overlooked, sidelined, underestimated, now folding quietly into a single undeniable truth. They came to my hospital. They sat in my department. And now they had no choice but to see me not as their daughter, but as the woman they never imagined I could become. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the heart monitor in Elise's room seemed to pause, as if stunned by the words. Hello, Chief of Surgery. Nurse Jackson's voice rang clear. Professional. Steady. But not cold. She wasn't just addressing me out of protocol, she was honoring the title. The years. The weight behind it. I nodded calmly, the way I always did in meetings with board members, as if this were just another day. But it wasn't. Not for the people in that room. My mother was the first to speak. Or try to. But that can't be right, she said, with a nervous laugh. My daughter works at a hospital in New York. Nurse Jackson looked confused, but remained respectful. Dr. Brooks has been chief of surgery here for 3 months now. One of the youngest in the hospital's history. I could feel the gears grinding in my parents' minds, trying desperately to realign a reality that had just cracked open in front of them. Elise blinked, visibly pale. Wait, you're what? I'm the chief of surgery, I said simply. At this hospital. My father took a step back, like the words had struck him physically. But why didn't you ever say anything? I met his eyes. When have you ever really wanted to hear it? Before anyone could respond, the door opened again. Dr. Bennett entered poised, efficient, exuding quiet authority. Her eyes immediately found mine. "Dr. Brooks," she said warmly. "Wasn't expecting to see you today." "Family emergency," I replied, glancing at Elise. Dr. Bennett nodded. "Your sister's in capable hands. I've reviewed the labs. The preeclampsia is moderate, but we're being cautious. I'd like to begin magnesium sulfate as seizure prevention." She turned to me with professional courtesy. "Do you concur?" The entire room froze again. A renowned specialist deferring to me. Seeking my opinion. Acknowledging my authority. "Yes," I said evenly. "I support that plan. I'd also recommend continuous fetal monitoring over the next 24 hours. Dr. Bennett smiled. "Exactly my thoughts." She turned to Elise. "You're in good hands here, Mrs. Archer." My father's voice finally found its way back into the room. "Hold on," he said. "Are you saying my daughter is making medical decisions about her own sister, isn't that a conflict of interest, Doctor?" Bennett raised an eyebrow, patient but firm. "Mr. Brooks, your daughter is one of the most respected, minimally invasive surgeons in the country. Her opinion is not only welcome, it's valued. That said, I will remain the attending and will make the final decisions." He said nothing more. Because what could he say? The wall had cracked. The truth had poured through. There was no putting it back together. The next wave of staff entered, a nurse preparing the IV, a resident with Elise's latest vitals. Each of them greeted me with professional deference. "Dr. Brooks." "Chief. Good to see you." My parents watched it all like a movie they didn't know they'd bought tickets to. Their expressions flickered between confusion, discomfort, and dawning realization. They weren't just seeing me succeed. They were seeing how much they had misunderstood me, how small their version of me had been. My mother reached for my hand, voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell us, Natalie?" I gently pulled my hand away. Would it have mattered if I had tears welled in her eyes? "That's not fair. We've always supported you." From the bed, Elise let out a soft scoff. "Come on, Mom." All eyes turned to her. "Let's not pretend," she said, voice hoarse but clear. "We all know Natalie was never the favorite. You made that pretty obvious." My father bristled. "Now's not the time for this." "No," I said quietly. "Now is exactly the time." He turned toward me, trying to regain control. "You know, we were just concerned. Medicine is hard. We didn't want you to burn out." "That's funny," I replied. "Because when Elise dropped out, you called it self-awareness. But when I excelled, you called it obsession." Neither parent responded. Dr. Patel, a junior attending who had entered moments earlier, glanced between us and said, gently, "I didn't realize Dr. Brooks was your daughter." He turned to my parents with genuine admiration. "She's a legend in our department, especially in the surgical innovation wing. She's been training us in techniques that most surgeons don't touch until their late 40s. He looked at me and smiled. "Your paper on robotic-assisted aortic valve repair, brilliant." My mother's face drained of color. My father's lips pressed together. And finally I saw what I had waited a lifetime to witness: recognition. Not just from strangers, but from the people who once decided I wasn't enough. There was nothing left for them to say. Because the room had said it for them. Because truth had said it for me. And the beautiful thing about truth is this: it doesn't need your permission to be real. It only needs to be spoken. Or in my case, vowed to. My father cleared his throat. His voice steadied into the tone I'd known my entire life, the one he used at corporate functions and family reunions, calm but carefully rehearsed. "We've always been proud of you, Natalie," he said. The words hung in the air like steam from a cold kettle, visible, fleeting, and ultimately empty. I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't nod politely or change the subject. I didn't swallow my hurt. I let it rise. "No," I said. "You weren't." My mother flinched. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair," I cut in, voice level but firm. "You didn't celebrate my wins. You didn't ask about my dreams. You didn't even see me." My father stiffened. "Now, Natalie, don't rewrite history." "I don't need to rewrite it," I said. "I lived it." The words poured out of me, not in anger but in clarity. When Elise said she wanted to be a doctor, you threw her a party. When I got into Princeton, you asked about the cost. When I won awards, you changed the subject. When I told you about my mentor, you asked if I was still seeing anyone. When I worked 16-hour rotations, you told people I was still plugging away. When Elise dropped out, you called her wise. I wasn't yelling. I didn't need to. The truth finally spoken was loud enough. My mother blinked, stunned. We were worried about you. Medicine is demanding. We just didn't want you to be alone. I was alone, I said. Because you never made room for who I really was. You decided what kind of daughter you wanted, and Elise fit the mold. My father looked away. You called me intense like it was a flaw, I continued. But that intensity saved lives. It built an entire department. It got me here. I stepped forward into the silence. And the reason I never told you any of it was because every time I did, you found a way to make it smaller. That's when Elise spoke. Her voice was softer than usual, lower, less performative, almost human. She's right, she said. Everyone turned toward her. I was the favorite, she admitted. You praised me for everything even when I didn't earn it. And you barely noticed when Natalie moved mountains. Elise, my mother started, but Elise held up a hand. I used to think I was just lucky, she said. That maybe I really was more lovable. But deep down I knew. I knew Natalie worked harder than all of us combined. I saw it. I didn't want to admit it. She looked at me then. Really looked. I was jealous of you, Nat. Still am. I swallowed, hard, emotion rising. Not from pain, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of being defended. I always had a spotlight, Elise continued. But I never earned it the way you did. You built yourself. You earned your place. My father sat down slowly in the corner chair like his legs had given up. I don't understand how we missed it, he said quietly. How we failed to see. My voice softened. You didn't fail to see. You chose not to. The words weren't cruel. They were just true. My mother dabbed her eyes, makeup smudging beneath her lashes. We were wrong. I didn't say, it's okay, because it wasn't. And that was important. It didn't have to be okay to be over. But I could see something new in their faces now, not just guilt but awareness. The kind that doesn't come from being caught but from finally understanding the weight of their absence. They had missed the rise. Missed the milestones. Missed the making of me. And now for the first time they knew it. Dr. Bennett returned, breaking the heaviness in the room. Vitals are holding steady, she reported. Magnesium is underway. We'll monitor her closely tonight. Thank you, I said. She gave me a quiet nod of respect and perhaps of recognition. Because something else had stabilized in that room too. Me. On my way out, I paused beside Elise. She reached for my hand. Do you think, she started hesitant. We could start over. I nodded. We can try. She squeezed my fingers. I want my kid to know you. To really know you. I smiled. Then you'd better start studying, I said, half laughing. Because even you don't fully understand what a cardiothoracic surgeon does yet. She laughed too. And for the first time in our lives, it wasn't a competition. It was connection. 3 months later, she arrived. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A full head of dark hair. Tiny fists clenched as if already ready to fight the world. My niece. And her name was Natalie. Emily didn't tell me until after the delivery. She was still groggy, lying in her hospital bed when I came in. I placed a hand on her arm gently, quietly. She looked up, eyes glassy with exhaustion and something deeper, something vulnerable. I wanted to tell you myself, she said, voice soft. We named her Natalie. I blinked. You. What, James loved it, she said quickly. But I chose it. I wanted her to grow up knowing strength doesn't always look loud. That sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one they need most. Tears welled up before I could stop them. I spent so many years wanting to be like you, she added. And I never told you. I was too proud. Too caught up in trying to be who they wanted. I sat down beside her, heart aching in the best way. She's going to know exactly who she's named after, Emily said, and why. Later, when I held baby Natalie for the first time, she yawned wide and wrapped her impossibly small fingers around mine. It was almost funny how a name could mean so much. How this moment so small could rewrite years of distance. There was no ceremony, no dramatic music, just warmth, and grace, and quiet understanding, and that was enough. 2 months after that, our hospital hosted its annual fundraising gala. I wasn't just attending this time, I was being honored for a procedural innovation that had reduced recovery times for cardiac patients by 40%, for mentoring over a dozen surgical residents, for being, as one board member phrased it, the quiet powerhouse who reshaped how we define leadership. I stood at the podium in a midnight blue dress, lights shining softly overhead. The ballroom was filled with physicians, philanthropists, press, and in the back row my parents. They had come, not out of obligation, but out of something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or the beginnings of humility. As I spoke, their eyes didn't wander. They didn't whisper. They listened. I used to believe success was about recognition, I said into the mic. About making noise loud enough to drown out doubt. A few people chuckled. They knew what that felt like. But over time, I realized success isn't about volume, it's about clarity. I glanced toward Dr. Lin, who gave me the smallest, proudest nod. Success doesn't require applause, or permission, or family tradition. It requires vision, grit, and belief. I paused, voice catching but not breaking. Especially self-belief. The room was quiet, and then applause. Standing ovation. Cameras flashing. But for once I didn't look around for approval. I didn't need it. Later, as the gala wound down, my mother approached me at the edge of the ballroom. "You were incredible," she said simply. I smiled. "Thank you, I mean it," she said. "We didn't see it before, any of it. But we do now." My father joined us, slipping his hand around her waist. "You didn't just succeed, Natalie, you led." I nodded. I didn't need an apology anymore. What I needed, they had already given me: silence. And listening. The next morning I visited Emily's home. Baby Natalie was in her bassinet, cooing softly. I picked her up, kissed her head, and whispered, "They'll never underestimate you." Because now she would grow up with more than just a name. She'd grow up with a legacy. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. Maybe you felt invisible in your own family. Maybe you've spent years trying to prove your worth to people who never learned how to see it. Or maybe you're still fighting to be heard, to be believed, to be enough. Here's what I'll say to you: success doesn't need their permission. Only your belief. Build in silence if you must. Rise slowly, brick by brick. Be undeniable. And one day, when the room goes quiet and all eyes turn to you,